Awesome. We're on. Shishir, welcome.
Welcome, Sriram.
I have to say, this is the first one of these, big virtual conference sessions I've done. Typically the way this would have worked in, the pre-pandemic world would be there'd be a large audience, there'd be people filing in, after grabbing some food, and maybe some people filing out. They're like, well, Shishir and Sriram are not interesting at all, and we just trying to get the audience going. In this case, we actually have a particularly tough challenge ahead of us because I think the previous two speakers, Jeff and Byron, have been fantastic. So we might need to spice things up a bit here, Shishir.
All right, sounds good. And we have no idea if people are leaving or staying, so we're just going to assume the best.
All right. And if you need to spice things up, we can just drop our script, and I can walk you through interesting names in the technology industry, and you can tell them whether you love them or hate them. We can just do that. Anyway, for everyone, thank you so much for joining us. Shishir and I have some fun stuff planned for you folks on how to build, in product teams. This is kind of a new experience for both of us. So if you have thoughts, feedback, just tweet us, find a way to reach out to us, and I'll try and work that in, and we'll try and keep it interesting. But first off, Shishir, right? I think you're kind of famous in many contexts, and I will, talk about some of those famous stories. But do you mind giving a quick introduction and story about how you got here?
Sure. So let's see. As the introduction mentioned, I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Coda. It's a new type of document that blends docs, sheets, slides, and apps into one new surface. The promise is anyone can make a doc as powerful as an app. Before this, I spent about 6 years at Google. Most of that time I was running the YouTube products. Tons of interesting stories. YouTube grew from when I joined about 100 people to thousands, and from about 25 million revenue to billions, and so on. Lots of great progress in that story. Before that, I spent 6 years at Microsoft and worked on Windows, Office, and SQL Server. And before that, I started a company called Centrata, whose probably biggest claim to fame was its number one competitor was a company called Opsware, whose founders are now Sriram's bosses. So that's our connection.
Nicely done. I didn't see that coming. Okay. Well, my backstory, one, as Shishir mentioned, I'm currently, as of 3 weeks ago, I'm a general partner at
shiny new venture capitalist.
Shiny, right? I'm pretty. I don't know how long that shiny part lasts, but hopefully it stays on for a while. But the interesting part, actually, when we actually planned on doing this, on this session, it actually happened way before I had joined. And so my backstory is, I grew up in India, but I'm kind of mostly known for, working in some large consumer platform companies. I spent the first formative years of my career at Microsoft, working on cloud computing. But after that, I joined Facebook in 2013, where I got the opportunity to go build out a lot of their mobile revenue and mobile ad products. So Shishir and I were kind of I guess, competing fiercely, or at least in my mind anyway, back then. So I spent a brief amount of time at Snap, and also for the last few years, before I joined, the dark side of venture capital, I headed up a lot of product at Twitter, and a lot of amazing stories about that. We saw elections, we saw a certain former head of state. We built a lot of amazing products. We grew user growth, to over 20%, 30% year over year. Lots of fun stories there. But yeah, so that's me. And I think between Shishir and me, we have some, really kind of fun stories and anecdotes and tips and tricks about, product teams. And I'm going to start off on, so Shishir kind of prep, some topics we thought would be really fun. And the first kind of question I want to ask you is, Shishir, and this is kind of a secret attempt to get into some of these spicy stories that I know you have. One of the things that you're famous for, outside of writing, these gorgeous docs on Coda, is you're famous for making up this word called the Eigen question. Which sounds so impressive. I don't even know what that means, but it sounds very impressive when you hear about it. But I know that you use it as a tool for decision making. Could you tell us about what an Eigen question means to you, and some spicy stories about how you used it in your career? The spicier, the better.
The word, by the way, is completely made up, and it's funny when I've been using the word for a long time, but we published it I think about a year ago, and I got all this feedback on whether or not it's appropriate use of the word. It's based on a mathematical term, eigenvalues and eigenvectors. For people that don't know, in the mathematical terms in linear algebra, the eigenvectors are the most discriminating vectors in a multidimensional space. The math does not really matter, but it gets used a
It's
lot.
a great way to engage an audience, right? Let me talk to
Yeah,
you about linear algebra in the
exactly.
first 4 minutes of the session. Like, good job.
So the math actually doesn't matter at all, but I had all these people come at me on Twitter with, well, that's kind of an inappropriate use of the word, and I said, well, I got you talking about it, so that's probably that's the goal of Twitter, right? So but I'll tell you the backstory behind this concept was a really fun and interesting, well, fun in retrospect at the time, not very fun decision that we had to make at YouTube. So I joined YouTube 2008, and one of the hard questions facing us at the time was this thing that often got referred to as the link out question, or more colloquially as the Modern Family question. And basically, what was happening was people would come to YouTube and they would search for Modern Family. And YouTube 2008, we didn't have Modern Family. We had these grainy clips of Modern Family, but we definitely didn't have what people were looking for. And at the same time, ABC.com was posting all the full episodes for Modern Family. It was a big new thing, and this was, by the way, the hottest show at the time. And there's this big, heavy debate inside the company on whether we should link out to ABC.com when people search for Modern Family on YouTube. And basically, the company divided into two halves. There was the product and engineering teams who thought this is obvious. We should link out. We now work for Google. We're the world's second largest search engine. Our job is to do right by the user, give people the answers they're looking for. Of course, we should link to whatever we think the best result is. All the business folks, the marketing team, the business development team, so on, they all thought this was stupid. Like, why, if you link out to these things, nobody's ever going to host their content on YouTube. And so this was framed as almost this like good, evil, do the right thing for the user, do the right thing for the business, and this one of these tensions that you and I have seen in many different circumstances. So this decision lasts for a long time. I mean, like months of this being at the top of a list of issues. And so then we had this offsite and went out to Half Moon Bay, and everybody had to prep a topic. And we decided this is going to be one of our topics, and I was assigned to prep how we're gonna make this call on linking out and what to do with Modern Family. And the night before, I was thinking about it, and I decided to frame it very differently. And instead of framing it as good versus evil, link out versus not, so on, there was another discussion happening at Google at the same time, which was Google Shopping was in this epic battle with Amazon. And they were having.
I think we know how that battle played out, Shishir.
Well, even then, it was obvious they were losing, right? So this was 12 years ago now, and by the way, the company was shocked, right? I mean, this is people remember the time it started. The name of the product originally was Frugal, and it was like very googly product. It was. And people were very confused. Amazon was kicking our butt, and nobody could make any sense of it because the Google Shopping results included every single product on Amazon. Why would you as a user ever go to Amazon if you could go to Google Shopping and find everything on Amazon and the entire internet? But of course, users were not deciding to do that. Users were instead deciding to go to Amazon. And this phenomenon was being framed as consistent over comprehensive. And the theory was that in the shopping space, we were learning that consumers valued consistency over comprehensiveness. And they would say things like, I'll go to the Amazon because the reviews all make sense, and I understand how the shipping works, and I understand how the products are priced, and so on. And it was becoming obvious that this was gonna be important in the shopping space. So we ended up reframing our discussion for YouTube. Instead of being good versus evil, being consistent versus comprehensive. Do we would rather have a consistent experience or have every piece of video and link off to different things? And this, I think, no longer is a good versus evil discussion. This is like, you can take reasonable perspectives on, is the video market going to be one where smaller catalog but more consistent is more important than the search engine that covers everything with an inconsistent experience? And we decided that we would focus on consistent, and we decided not to link out, and that decision was made. But the more important thing was, once we made that decision, we didn't frame it as we're not going to link out. We phrased it as we're going to choose consistent over comprehensive. And that ended up making 10 other decisions. And all of a sudden, we had all these deals to embed video players on YouTube. Those all went away. Probably the most famous decision that came out of this was the YouTube app at the time was still built by Apple. People remember when the iPhone came out, there was no app store. So all the apps were built by Apple, and YouTube was one of the first ones they built, and they just hadn't stopped. And they weren't really keeping up, and almost half the YouTube catalog didn't even play back on the iPhone anymore. And I got to do this really fun trip. I drove down to Cupertino, spent time with Scott and Phil on, and I told them we want to take back the YouTube app. And they said, well, do you realize that you're going to sacrifice guaranteed distribution to the dominant mobile platform if you do this? And I said, yeah, but our value is very clear. We pick consistent over comprehensive. So we much rather have smaller audience with a consistent experience. This idea that we could answer one question and then have it answer 10 others, that's the heart of where this term eigenquestion came from. So the idea is the most discriminating vector in a vector space applied to decision making is when you have a stack of 10 questions, find the one that if you answered it, it answers all the other 9 questions. And the interesting thing about that is we'll have lots of discussions, at Coda and my team at YouTube, so on, where all of a sudden it's not about getting to the right answer, it's about getting to the right question. And that totally changes how you think about decision making. It's like, are we asking the right question? So anyways, that term is really stuck, and people seem to like it.
Yeah, but I'm just taking down what's most interesting vector in the vector space. Got it. I think it's a couple of things. First, I can just imagine the meeting where, this has probably been going on for months. There are entrenched camps. Everyone's really emotional. There's a lot of back channel politicking going around. And then here you are, and then you present well, let me explain to you what an eigenvector is. And first of all, I just confused everybody in the room, which is great, right? But I think the secret, one of the, I was thinking about this. I think one of the reasons this works is it removes the emotional charge from a conversation. Because I think a lot of us, especially larger companies, have experienced this where after a period of time, when you're so entrenched in your kind of camp for a decision, you almost get removed from the original intellectual foundations of what the decision was. You just know that, you are in the X camp or the Y camp.
You're labeled, yes.
And what this does is kind of it just switches it around and it removes the emotional charge from a situation. The second part, I think, which is interesting, is it lets you make it. First of all, I really appreciate that you can make decisions and have it be intellectually honest and correct. But the second part is then people can say yes, and they don't have to lose face because they're not giving in on an intellectual, which I really love.
There's a really good. If people haven't read the Heath brothers books, all of the Heath brothers books, Chip and Dan Heath, are really good. There's a book called Decisive that is all about how to make great decisions. And they talk about this idea that one of the examples they run through is they took 3 designers two sets of 3 designers, and they had them do a design with a review process. And one group was told, you're going to make a design and you're going to go through 9 different review cycles. And they had these expert designers give them feedback, and you're going to get 9 pieces of great feedback, and we'll see how good a design you come out with. And the other set of designers was given, they're told you have to make 3 designs, and you'll get 3 review cycles for each design. So in total, you'll also get 9 review cycles, but you're going to get it across 3 options instead of across 1 option. And then they measured the results, and they had people judge on the designs and so on. You can read the book for exactly how they did it. But one of the interesting things that came out of it was the designers in the second group. The design, obviously, the ones that generated 3 options ended up with better designs, which is not necessarily obvious. They went only through 3 rounds of feedback instead of 9, but they still ended up with better designs. But the designers felt much better about it. And one of the big reasons was they didn't feel as attached to their design. Because it's like, somebody's giving them feedback and they say, oh, yeah, that's true. Option A versus option B. That's true. That option B is better in this way. Option A is better in this way. And when you sort of pull people out of that, you can make better decisions. And I think it's really, a lot of what we do in these companies is make hard decisions. And so the how do you remove the emotion? How do you frame the problem well? How do you get to, is it the right question? Those are all really important techniques.
One interesting takeaway, I think, and especially a lot of people, watching this who might be earlier in their career, is one failure pattern I've seen is somebody is very, entrenched in idea. They believe something is, really powerful, the right thing to do for the company. Sometimes it's very like a religious belief. For example, religious belief can be, this is the right thing for the customer. That sentence always frustrates me because there are a lot of things that can be very right for the customer. your company being healthy is actually also in some ways right for the customer. But then they get a no, or they don't get the reaction they expect, and this kind of keep pounding at the wall. And they're incredibly passionate and good at what they do, and they get frustrated. They're also burning relationships. Everyone else getting frustrated at them, and they're usually not getting anywhere. And sometimes what you see, and so I think the trick is, when you're running into a wall and you're not able to convince people to resist the temptation to just kind of power through, and that can sometimes work. For example, in this case, maybe if you had gotten the right number of Google founders or Google execs arrayed, maybe one camp could have easily won. But the other, maybe better answer is to reframe the decision, bring a completely different angle to it, so they don't get these entrenched camps. But by the way, the other situation I think this comes up a lot, Shishir, is negotiations, where often in negotiations you get stuck in, I want more, you want less, etc. And it's very hard. Like, for example, let's say somebody wants more money, or you're offering them less money on any side of the equation, you're just stuck, right? All you're doing is like, you can just offer one or the other. And I think the reframing often really helps, and it takes an emotional charge out of a situation and brings a whole new lens. So I think this trick, this technique, minus the math, can work a lot. The math also impresses people. It makes you sound really smart.
The math is definitely a hook. That's true.
Yeah, but Shishir can just drop, like, I went to MIT, right? Are you going to argue with me about the math, right? And just keep people shut up. Okay.
I can start the next topic. So I think the one of the things we were talking about as we were prepping for this is, I think Sriram, we sometimes refer to him as the trifecta leader. He worked at the three of the most iconic social media companies in that generation. If I don't count YouTube as a social media company, so I think one thing that would be really fun is you've also not only three iconic social media companies, but three of the most iconic leaders who seem, at least on the outside, to be very different from each other. So maybe one prompt is, tell us a little bit about your favorite stories of, Zuck and Jack and Evan and so on.
Yeah, this is a good question. I like to joke that I'm Thanos, but a nerdy version collecting the infinity gauntlet of social media companies. And instead of TikTok, I joined venture capital. But I think this is an interesting question because, one, these people are all really interesting. Zuck, Jack, and Evan Spiegel, they're all obviously really interesting founders. They've built amazing companies. They're going to be around for a very long period of time, influencing our industry. I think the second interesting question here is, these companies are not similar, but for a lot of people outside the tech industry, they kind of seem similar, right? They're kind of all social media companies. They've often encountered very similar decisions, ranking, misinformation, product changes, and they have such different internal cultures and approaches. So one of the lessons I have from this is there are many, many ways to get to very similar outcomes. There are many, many ways to build an amazing company. There are many, many ways for a founder to act from front of the company background. But for specific stories, right? And let me pick the eigenvector to maybe like once, is that the right usage? I don't care, right? Like, integral differential eigen something. Anyway, so I'm going to pick the, maybe one little anecdote trying to illustrate each person. First off, I think Mark and Facebook, I think two of Mark's superpowers, right, are, I think one is to think about the long-term strategic impact of pretty much anything. In any review with him, you're always going to get pushed on, what does this look like 5 years from now? How is the world changing? What is it going to mean to take 10x? And he's always going to push you on just like the long-term strategic changes. And he always thinks in terms of, like, for example, he plays, Civ 5, and he's one of the best in the world at it. So he always thinks in terms of strategy, and he's very good at it. And I think the second part is speed and impact. He's very, very good at pushing the company to move very, very quickly and to optimize for impact. And this sounds like a platitude, right? Like, I'm sure a lot of people listening to this are like, well, that sounds reasonable. A lot of people do that. But to give you an example, Facebook seems like one of the dominant companies in the technology industry now, and they're going to be around for a very long period of time. But in 2011, 2012, that was not the case, right? They were a hot young company. They were just about to go public, but the world was quickly changing. They were undergoing this big platform transition where everyone was just starting to use these things, and before they were using the desktop. And 2012 was actually an interesting point. That was the last time, I don't think it's publicly known, but it's probably okay. That was the last time desktop traffic on Facebook was more than mobile traffic. This kind of a curve where the curves crossed in 2012. And of course, the mobile traffic just took off, and that was the end of that. And Facebook had kind of this deep cultural problem, right? First of all, obviously in the outside, they were not making any money on mobile. And one of the questions about their IPO back then in 2013 or late 2012 was like, how is this company, which is making all of its money on desktop, ever survive the transition to mobile? But the second big challenge was culturally, the entire company was built on web computing, right? They're built on PHP. They're running all these A/B tests where you inject a piece of CSS and HTML and you run a test. And their whole culture, the skill set of the engineers was all built around the web. And mobile was kind of a big, new thing for them. And I remember at the time when they couldn't even get the Xcode project to build properly, for a long period of time. It was. I remember, when I joined Facebook, this process to set up your web deployment was like 3 minutes, and the process to set up like Xcode was like a few days to get it all work. And one thing that a lot of companies historically have not survived these platform shifts. Like the history of technology industry is littered with how many companies were big before the PC came up, and then Microsoft took over, and that was the end of tech. That was the end of Lotus. That was the end of all these amazing companies. But Facebook has obviously survived and thrived. And one of the things that Mark did really well is he kind of like pulled this lever and said the entire company needs to make mobile a priority. Now, a lot of CEOs would do that and they'll send a nice memo, but Mark showed it in every single action. Like, for example, when you went to a review with Mark in 2013, unless the mobile screenshot, I mean, this sounds normal now. In 2013, that was not a thing. Unless the mobile marks and screenshots were the first thing you showed, he would end the meeting right there. As in, he would just be like, all right, thank you folks for coming. I'll see you when you folks have mobile. And you just get up and he'd walk you politely to his door and he'd show you out. And that very, very quickly, set the tone that, oh my gosh, like we aren't messing around when it comes to mobile. Second, he basically said, listen, we're going to be a mobile company. Everybody has to learn mobile development. He actually stopped all development of the company for a period of time and it got everybody to learn mobile. And that amount of dramatic, culture shift, which only I think a founder can do, can really help Facebook not just survive, but thrive in mobile. The only other equivalent I think of which is similar is Bezos in 2005, 2006, around the time frame, shifting Amazon to an internal service-oriented architecture. So, but Mark is, I think, multiple times, I have the example where he makes these big impactful changes. So I think that's one of Mark's superpowers, optimizing for speed and optimizing for impact. With Evan Spiegel, I think Evan is probably the most intuitive product designer I've ever met. So, for example, if you think about Snap lenses, which all of us know as filters, they all seem fun and goofy. But one of the reasons they really work is because they let you post a selfie. And they give you a social license to do so. Like Shishir and I are having a perfectly normal conversation, but Shishir starts like posting like 20 selfies after this conversation, which I highly suggest Shishir to do. People are like, like, she's normal. What's up with that guy, right? Because it breaks the etiquette we have for social media. But Evan was kind of a genius to kind of figure out, well, with bringing, the idea of giving you a license, making it fun, making it look good. The lenses made you look good. They gave you good lighting. They, and putting it in a digital package was a powerful product. And I'll give you an example. Back in 2016, Snap launched this product called Auto Advance, where you could see a friend's story and it would automatically start skipping to the next story. And Evan quickly realized that feature does not work because who actually chooses to see your story? And often it is like a good-looking person in your high school class that you might have a crush on. It actually matters. So when you are automatically flipping between stories, it devalued that currency. So Evan was kind of really good about just kind of understanding these things very, very intuitively. And I think he's still a genius at that. And finally, for Jack is the most amazing person I've seen at pushing for simplicity and pushing for principles. So, for example, I think, and focus on 140 characters to 280 characters. He has a lot of stories around that. But anyway, so so kind of going back to building amazing product teams. So Shishir, so one of the things I've been thinking about is you and I have worked in like many interesting product teams and many different kinds of product thinkers, right? What are example stories of amazing product thinkers that you have seen? And and how do you kind of bring together a strong product team? Because product people come in different sizes, in different flavors. What are kind of examples where you've seen like these are kind of different product people that you can bring together?
So I get to make up another word. So there's a framework and a little story about where this came from, and put us in the right time. 2011, 2012, Larry took over as CEO of Google. He made a whole bunch of different changes. One of the changes he made was he shifted us from being a functional organization to being business unit organization, and which was long overdue for Google, and it kind of blew up having a central product management structure, engineering structure, so on. And so a group of us had to come together and reassess how we think about what is a great product thinker, what's a great product manager, so on. And we ran this really fun exercise where we took the level guide. Every company has a level guide. This is what a good PM is, and level 1, level 2, level 3, whatever. We took a level guide, we cut it into little strips of paper, and we cut off the number and title of the level, and we handed it out to everybody and said, can you reverse identify which level this represents? And nobody could do it. And this was after this level guide had been created after 14, 15 years of iteration. And so it's just full of all sorts of stuff. Like it said things like, this person can manage a medium-sized project, and interviews candidates regularly, and always sends their trip reports and expense reports on time, and all these different things that were just like kind of stuffed in because that's the incentives we wanted to create. And that was like a group product manager. And so we found that this was not that helpful. But if you took the little sheets of paper and you put them side by side, you could rank them on exactly one sentence, which mostly oriented towards scope. And so you could say small project, medium project, big project, so on. It turns out that was mostly how we were judging product people, is what is the size of the project that they're working on. And so we said, okay, we had a discussion about it. We're trying to align across these 8 divisions at Google now. And we decided, okay, we're going to try to normalize what we mean by scope. And we came up with a framework for it, and we sent everybody off. And then we came back for the next sort of joint meeting, and everybody complained. So this didn't work at all. We had these different definitions, and the head of search product complained that, hey, look, like all of search is one product, so it kind of is one scope, and the ads team generates like hundreds of products, so they put SKUs on everything. And so it's completely unfair. It's easier to get promoted in the ads team than the search team. And so they also said it's also unfair because the size of scope you own is an input, not an output. Like people would come and say, well, this person needs to get promoted. Look at how much they own. We would say, but you gave them that. Like, why can we can't promote them for what you did? Like, how did they do? It's got to be something else. And then the third reason it didn't work was all our best people were working on these like crazy projects where the scope seemed small. But the impact was potentially very large. And so the all the incentives were kind of screwed up. So we came up with a new framework for it, and the acronym is PSHE, and it's not it unfortunately doesn't match to a good word, but so I just pronounce it as it's push. Push is the way we talk about it, but a PSHE. And the way it works is problem, solution, how, execution. So when you're a junior product person, what do? Somebody hands you a problem, somebody hands you the solution, somebody hands you the how. They say, you got to talk to this person, you got to write this document, you got to hold this meeting, and then your job is just to execute. Then over time, you get a little bit more advanced, and people hand you a problem, they hand you a solution, and you figure out the how. You figure out the milestones, you figure out the process, the cadence, all these different things. At some point, the people hand you the problem, and you come back with the solution. You say, this is the way to solve this hard problem. And at some point, you get handed a space, and you figure out the problems. You come back and say, I know you told me to focus on activation, but actually monetization is our bigger issue. Or you told me to focus on brand, but I think our issue is our team, whatever it might be. And so this was actually a lot better. It's a PSHE. It was much easier to understand how people do the job. So everybody went off and sort of reevaluated their team on these 2 axes. And there's a kind of a fun chart you could make of scope on one axis and PSHE on the other axis. And the spread that came back made an S curve. And it's super interesting. So early on in people's career, great product, the early product managers were mostly handed a problem, handed a solution, handed a how, and just executed on slightly bigger projects. And that, from that perspective, scope was the most relevant dimension. Later in people's career, same thing happened. You're general manager, you run a product division, you're a CEO. Those problems get bigger and bigger and bigger. But the middle of people's career, the axis changed. And it wasn't mostly about scope. It was mostly about this PSHE axis. And we drew a big circle around it. We called it the Trough of Disillusionment. And the reason is most employees judge themselves based on scope, because that's what we've taught them to do. And from the perspective of a team trying to evaluate them, and at Google we had promotion committees. Your boss didn't promote you, your committee did. So we'd give this talk to the committees and say, for what is the majority of the product people that we had, the access to judge them on isn't the job they do, it's how they do the job. I've since figured out this PSHE framework. It was designed around product managers. I've since found that it applies to basically every job. We do the same thing for designers, for engineers, salespeople. I mean, if you ask well, who's the best salesperson on the team? People will say, well, here's a person who has great quota attainment and beats their quota every quarter. Everybody who knows anything about sales knows that quota attainment is mostly about great negotiation of quota early on in the process. If you ask their peers, who's the best salesperson, they'll use phrases like, oh, this person can jump into any problem. They can sell a product that is working, that is not working, a new region, an old region, a customer that's churning, a customer that's growing. And what you'll find is phrases that are very close to how you think about PSHE. So I found this framework, problem, solution, how, execution, to be one of the best tools for judging the difference between good and great.
I love that. That is fantastic. It's way more thought through than anything I've seen. I'm really going to take this in a very slightly different direction. I think there's a lot of writing online about what a good product manager is. A lot of analogies. It's often hard to define what a product manager is, and we use these reasoning by analogy. We use camp counselor, central node, and they all have some element of truth to it. But I think one of the challenges, like product managers are so different in skill sets, that you need to find a match between the problem you're trying to solve and the kind of personality that you're trying to hire. For example, sometimes you need product managers who can go from 0 to 1, and that's kind of like a sexy thing that a lot of people care about. Like, can this person go to 0 to 1? It turns out it's actually not the skill you need in a lot of cases. And if your company's kind of been growing for a while, it is definitely not the skill set you need, because often the people who are fantastic going from 0 to 1 are often, and it's not always the case, and are often not the best at managing multiple stakeholders, are often not the most detailed. They could be, but they're often not. And so one thing I often push people on is it's instead of having a generic what is a great product manager, or even worse, a milquetoast description where like you find this magical unicorn who's amazing at charisma, who's amazing at like speaking for the customer, is amazing at getting the trains run on time. You need to really understand like what is the role in the team. For example, right? Like I've historically thrived in situations which required, I would say, product thinking, which require a lot of pixels, which require a lot of consumer psychology. I often struggled in situations which was really large stakeholder management, really large, detailed execution and project management with like complex dependencies, right? On the other hand, I know people who are fantastic at, for example, in which we work in hardware, you have like all these like deep supply chains and, partners who are not even part of the company you have to work with. And, and I think one particular thing I push people on is don't just, when you think of building a product team, think about what is the kind of role that you're trying to fill in for, what are the kind of challenges they're going to run into, and then find the personality to match, because product managers come in incredibly different shapes and sizes. So I think that's kind of like one of the pieces of advice I have for people.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think we have about like 7-8 minutes left. One of the topics I think come for product teams is always how do you set goals for them, and how do you kind of set OKRs? So I think I want to get to a couple of questions. So you are infamous, notorious for coming up with the 1 billion hour goal for YouTube. By the way, folks haven't seen that, go get John Doerr's book on OKRs. Shishir is the lead protagonist, of that book. And so I'm just curious about your thinking about OKRs and thinking of goals, the YouTube story, and also, do you know about how Coda can be used to help with such tasks?
Oh, that's a good lead. OKRs are a very classic Coda use case. We have lots of people use Coda that way because it's a very natural collaborative process where one of the hallmarks of I'll answer the second part first, is one of the hallmarks of Coda is when you start out this promise that anyone can make a doc as powerful as an app, you end up covering a lot of cases that sort of fall between that chasm. I think everybody's had this experience where you're creating something for your team and you're in docs, spreadsheets, so on, and then there's some packaged app, and then there's this big chasm between them where the thing you're doing, I like to say, is too unique for the packaged app, but is too important for the spreadsheet. And that's where products like Coda really shine. And so we've seen, many companies that with thousands of people that run their whole planning process and so on Coda. So it's a fairly typical technique. But the billion-hour thing is actually slightly different.
Nice Coda plug. Everyone go use Coda.
Yeah.
Good plug.
The billion-hour thing is it's an interesting story in lots of different ways. And whenever I get asked about this, in some senses that situation is not going to get repeated that often. But the situation we were in at the time is important to remember. Is that this was 2012. I'd been at YouTube for 4 years at that point, and we'd kind of won. Right? Like we there's the people may not remember this, but when Google bought YouTube 2008, we were the joke company. We were seen to be the first mistake that Google made. Every other acquisition had done really well. Here we were losing billions of dollars a year, grainy videos, big lawsuits.
Same thing for Instagram, by the way. So there might be a lesson in here.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I think it's we at least at the time. I think we were. When I joined, most of the message I got from people, including family members, like, "What are you doing? Joining the sinking ship." My discussions with the new CFO at Google at the time, Patrick Pichette, Patrick was constantly pushing us on who else wanted to buy this thing. Can we sell it to them? So this was the mindset of this team, 2008. It's in the Pirates Navy analogy, this was a group of pirates, right? So all these people get together and say, I think we can do it. There's something here. There's this trend. Our rallying cry was online video is going to do to cable what cable did to broadcast. And we're going to go from 3 channels to 300 channels to 3 million channels. It's a very formative view to look at the world and so on. And we executed on that plan. And we, got profitable. We figured out how to make it a platform for creators, a way to pay everybody. All these different things happened. And we get to 2012, and all of our competition has kind of gone away. It did early on, there was a bunch of video hosting properties, but they're all gone, right?
A bunch of Google lawyers are really happy that you just said the sentence, all of our competition has gone away.
Yeah, that's right. Careful where I land on that. So but this is the situation we're in, right? So we're looking at this, and a lot of people think that must feel really good. Like everybody must be creative and innovative and so on. Actually, it's terrible. Right? What happens to the company at that point is you just can't make decisions about anything. We would have these like very simple launch reviews, and you'd come in and you'd say, hey, can I launch this thing or not? And we had this, like every company, had this big dashboard of all the different metrics to look at. There were literally 200 different metrics to look at on this thing. Yeah. And no matter what you did, something went up, something went down. Right? And there was no real clarity on what to do about it. The other thing that was happening was nobody really had that drive for the next big innovative thing and so on. So there were 2 stories told at this time that led to this billion-hour goal. So one was there was a story told about Coca-Cola. And apparently there was this is all folklore, but there's apparently this big board meeting where the Coke board members got together, and so one of them said, but this is crazy. Every meeting, it's like we have 52% share, 48% share versus Pepsi. Everything was share of the brown carbonated water market. Like that can't be all we're doing here. And so he said, well, you have a better idea. And he said, well, what if we measured as percentage of the stomach, and we do something that is like what percentage of what people consume is coming from our company? And that led to, it's a good Eigen question, right? That led to, they started getting into, flavored water and all these other drinks and so on. And, Coke has grown beyond that. The other story was told about the British rowing team. And I don't know anything about rowing, but apparently it's really important in Britain. And this team was struggling with winning the Olympics, and they were very proud, and it was very hurtful. And so they came up with this idea that said, we're going to make every decision on a single question. The question is, will it make the boat go faster? And should we put this person on the team? Well, will it make the boat go faster? Where should we go for dinner? Well, should we go for Italian? Will it make the boat go faster? Should we go to this regatta? Will it make the boat go faster? Everything they decided was like aimed at this. Will it make the boat go faster? So we had this discussion and said, all right, we need our version of this, and answer both things. What's our percentage of stomach, and will it make the boat go faster? And we had a bunch of candidate goals and so on, and we landed on this one billion-hour goal, right? And so get up in front of the team. This is November of 2012. And I made this statement. We're going to set a new goal in the next 4 years. We're going to get to 1 billion hours a day of viewership. And as a reminder, nobody knows what the hell billion hours per day means. So first I have to define it. So, okay, so where we're at now. So at the time we were doing about 100 million hours a day of viewership. What does that mean? Is that good? Is that bad? Well, Google was also doing about 100 million hours a day of time on site. So it's pretty similar. Gmail, Maps one were about 17 million hours. And Facebook was the high watermark on the internet, was about 200 million hours a day. But the real point of the story was television was watched 5 billion hours a day. So if we get to 1 billion hours a day, not only will we be the biggest site on the internet, we'll be still only 20% of the stomach, 20% of television. The other thing we had to do was translate it in every team. So we talked about what does this mean for the consumer team, the ads team. So one of the most famous ones was the infrastructure team. We said at the time, we were responsible for about 20% of the bits on the internet flowed through YouTube servers. If we get from 100 million hours a day to 1 billion hours a day, we are going to be streaming more bits than the entire internet times 2. And that was a very motivating sentence. So that's the situation.
One question is like, what is achieving? I think, is it just about like, hey, here's a big, hairy, audacious goal that, just kind of like motivates people. It's somewhat aspirational, but not maybe totally crazy.
I mean, I think we're out of time, but that's probably what I would take away is when you get lucky to find that thing that you can make feel big, hairy, audacious goal and connect it to everybody, and at the same time decide your North Star metric. That's what we got out of that goal, and it was very motivating. The team definitely worked, and the team hit it.
Awesome. Okay. Any last thoughts for our audience? Because I know we're out of time. Outside of Coda.
I use Coda. It's fine. It's easy to find both of us. Hit us up on Twitter or your various social media and ask any questions. But always enjoy talking to groups of entrepreneurs, product thinkers, so on. And thanks, Sriram, for hosting a great chat.
Yeah. I want to thank you so much for everybody for listening in. If you have feedback, just hit us up. If you have negative feedback, just hit Shishir up alone personally. You can leave me out of that. But no, this is fantastic, and we just love talking to this. I've known Startup Grind forever. I love talking to this audience. And look, me and the firm I work at, we are in the business of finding and supporting fantastic founders and companies. And if there's anything I can ever help you with that, feel free to reach out. But this is super fun. Reach out, tell us how you're doing. It's kind of weird to just talk to a Zoom camera screen and not know how everyone's feeling. So just reach out to us and tell us things. But Shishir, this is awesome. Thanks so much for doing this.
All right, thanks.
All right, thanks everyone. See you out on the internet.